On the morning they gave Marin Kale to the Iron King, the frost had come down so hard in the night that the water in the ceremonial basin had frozen through before the priest could bless it. A clean gray disk of ice, sealed over the silver, and no one thought to break it, so that when the old man dipped his 2 fingers to mark her brow, he found only cold, and his own reflection, and had to press until the surface starred and split beneath his hand. She would remember that afterward, when she remembered very little else clearly about that morning, not the words, not the faces, only the small crack of the ice, and the way the priest had flinched, as though the basin had bitten him. It was done by the time the bells rang the 2nd hour. She was bonded, she was given. Whatever she had been before that morning, a name from a valley no one at the Grey Keep could pronounce, a girl who counted things because counting kept her hands from shaking, she was now a thing that belonged to Halvard Draith, called the Iron King, called the Iron Mouth, called by the women in the low kitchens a great many other things they would not say where the hounds might carry it back. She did not weep. That surprised the people who had come to watch. They had wanted her to weep, the way tribute brides always wept, and when she did not, they decided she was simple, or cold, or broken already, and they went home disappointed. Marin was none of those things. She was only very busy, on the inside, counting the 7 gray banners along the hall, the 11 iron rings set into the wall where torches burned, the 240 stones she could see in the floor between her feet and the dais. She counted them twice. The second count came to 241, because she had missed one the first time, a small one, chipped at the corner, half hidden under the hem of the priest's robe. She was a woman who noticed the small ones. That was the whole of her, if you wanted the whole of her in a single line. Not clever the way the court called men clever. Not beautiful, though her face was the kind that grew on a person slowly, like a room you did not like at first and then could not leave. She noticed the small chipped things, the overlooked things, the 1 stone in 240 that everyone else stepped across without seeing, and she remembered them, and she waited. Marin had been born in the Low Valley, in the last of the free holdings, in a house that smelled of woad and river mud, because her mother dyed wool, and her father tanned hides, and both trades want water and stink, so the 2 of them had married as much for the shared smell as for anything else. She had learned to count before she learned to read, because her mother could not read but could count to the last copper, and a dyer who cannot count her copper is a dyer who starves in a hard winter. She had learned the weights and the measures. She had learned how much matter made a true red and how much made a red that ran. She had learned that most people, given a chance to cheat you, will cheat you exactly as much as they think you will not notice, and so the trick of not being cheated is to notice more than they believe you can. She was 17 the winter the Iron King's men came down into the Low Valley to collect what the valley owed. The valley owed a great deal. It had owed a great deal for 3 generations, because the Draith kings kept ledgers the way other men kept grudges, and the interest on a conquered people is a debt that is designed never to close. When the accounting was done and the granaries were emptied, and it was found the valley still could not pay, the king's steward had looked over the assembled families with the flat, bored patience of a man choosing a hen for the pot, and had said that the debt would be settled in the old way, in blood and bond, and that the valley would send one of its own up to the Grey Keep to be given to the king. They had not chosen Marin for her beauty. They had chosen her because she had no living mother left to scream, no brothers to make trouble, and because, this was said quietly, in the way people say the cruelest things, she would not be missed. She had listened to all of it from the back of the crowd, counting the king's men. There were 19. She had thought, with the strange flat calm that came over her when she was most afraid, 19 men to collect one girl who will not be missed. And she had understood, in that counting, something the valley elders had not, that the king was not afraid the girl would run. The king was afraid of what the girl might carry with her, up the mountain, into his house. The valley had old stories, the mountain had older ones. She had not understood, then, what she was walking toward. She understood only that she was walking, and that the frost was early, and that she had packed into her one small bundle the things a person packs when she does not expect to come home. Her mother's chipped blue mug, enamel worn to gray at the lip, a hairline crack running down one side that had never yet leaked, a twist of birch bark tea, bitter as regret, which was the only thing that had ever helped her sleep, and a bone needle, because a woman who can mend can always make herself a little less useless than they expect. The bonding ceremony itself she had walked through as one walks through cold water, feeling each step but refusing to let the cold reach any higher than it had to. The gray keep swallowed her at the gate. It was a fortress of the old gray stone, older than the Draith line by centuries, older than the kingdom's memory of itself, and the Draith kings had never quite managed to make it feel like theirs. It felt, Maren thought, like a house whose true owner has only gone out and will be back before dark. The banners were new, the stone was not. The stone did not care about the banners. They dressed her in gray wool, because tribute brides wore gray, and they walked her the length of the great hall to the dais where Halvard Draith waited. He was younger than she had expected, and worse. She had built him in her mind as an old ogre, and it would have been easier if he had been one. Instead, he was a tall, well-made man of perhaps 40, with a jaw like a shut door, and eyes the pale flat gray of river ice, and he watched her come up the hall with the mild, proprietary interest of a man watching a horse led into his yard. Sound in the legs. Good teeth. He did not smile. Later she would learn that Halvard Draith almost never smiled, and that the rare times he did were the times a wise person left the room. "This is the one?" he said. Not to her. To the steward. "From the low valley, my king. The last debt of the western holdings." "She's small," Halvard said. "She'll do the counting, my king. They say she can hold a full ledger in her head." Something moved behind the pale eyes at that. Not warmth, only a sharpening, the look of a man who has been handed a tool and is deciding where to keep it. "Can she?" he said. It was not a question. He looked at Maren then, directly, for the first time, and said, "Do you know what you are?" "A debt, my king," Maren said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "Paid." The hall went very quiet. It was not the answer of a broken girl. The steward's mouth thinned, but Halvard Draith tilted his head a fraction, the way a hound tilts its head at a sound too high for the room, and something that was not a smile touched the corner of his mouth, and was gone. "Paid," he agreed. And it was during this, during the priest's droning, during the marking, during the cold press of the king's hand closing over hers, to seal the bond in the old way, that Maren first saw the boy. He came in from a side door near the dais, limping, carrying a scuttle of coals for the brazier that had gone low behind the king's chair. No one looked at him. That was the first thing she noticed, the way the whole bright hall arranged itself so as not to see him. A boy of perhaps 20, thin, ash-smudged, dressed in the undyed servant gray, that was a shade meaner than her tribute gray, his dark hair falling over a face kept carefully down. He dragged his left leg. Not badly, but steadily, the old drag of a wound that had set wrong a long time ago and been walked on ever since. He knelt to feed the brazier, and as he tipped the coals in, his eyes came up, just once, just for the length of a held breath, and met hers across the width of the dais. She did not know why she remembered his eyes, and not the king's. The king's eyes had been the color of river ice. The boy's were dark, and tired, and old in a way that had nothing to do with the count of his years, and when they met hers, the frozen basin at the priest's elbow gave a small dry crack, all on its own, a second star spreading across the ice, and the nearest of the king's great gray hounds, a scarred old bitch chained by the dais, rose from where she had been sleeping and stood, ears flat, staring at the boy, and would not lie down again. No one else marked it. Maren marked it. She marked the crack in the ice, and the standing hound, and the way the boy's jaw had tightened, as though he too had heard the crack and knew, better than anyone in the room, exactly what it meant. Then he looked down again, and was only a servant boy, and the ceremony went on, and she was married to the Iron King under banners that were not old enough for the house that held them. She learned the legend the way you learn everything true in a great house, in the kitchens, after dark, from the women who were paid to see nothing, and therefore saw everything. The still room at the Grey Keep was ruled by an old woman named Sorrel, brown and bent and hard as a walnut, who had come to the keep as a girl, and stayed 60 years and buried 3 kings, and expected to bury a 4th, and who took one look at Marin on that first night, sitting stiff and sleepless on the edge of the queen's cold bed, and brought her, unasked, a cup of something hot. "Drink," Sorrel said. "You'll not sleep, but you'll stop shaking, and stopping shaking is the first thing." Marin drank. It was bitter, and under the bitter there was something green and living, and it did stop the shaking. She wrapped her hands around the cup, not her own chipped blue one, that she had hidden away, and said, because she had to say something to this blunt old woman, who had appeared out of the dark like a piece of the keep come loose, "Why did the ice crack?" "At the marking, on its own." Sorrel went very still. It was the stillness of a woman, deciding whether the thing in front of her can be trusted, and Marin, who noticed the small ones, saw the exact moment the old woman decided she could. Not out of warmth, but out of a kind of grim recognition, one careful survivor knowing another. "You saw that," Sorrel said. "I saw the boy too, with the coals. Everyone made themselves not see him." Sorrel sat down. She had not meant to, Marin could tell. She sat down the way people sit when the thing they are about to say has been sitting on them for years, and has finally found a chair of its own. "This keep," Sorrel said, "is older than the Draeth. You've felt it. Everyone feels it and no one says it, because saying it is a kind of treason now. Before the Draeth, before the Iron Kings, there were the Grey Kings, the Corvain. 500 years they held this throne, and it was said their blood was in the stone, that they could wake the stone if they had to, that the frost obeyed the old ones the way the hounds obey a true master, not because it is beaten to it, but because it knows him." She turned her cup in her hands. 500 years ago, the Draeth threw them down, drowned the old king in his own moat, and salted his line, killed every Corvain they could find, and hunted the ones they couldn't, and told the kingdom the grey blood was gone from the world, and the kingdom believed it. It's easier to believe a thing is over. "And the throne?" Marin said. "The grey throne. Did the Draeth take it?" Sorrel's mouth did a thing that was almost a smile, and was mostly not. "Try to sit in it," she said. "Someday, when the king is out. See how long you last." The Draeth built a new one, iron, and they sit in that. The grey throne stands empty behind the arras in the old hall. They say the Draeth cannot bear to look at it, and cannot bear to break it, because breaking a thing gives it a kind of power, so it waits. Waits for what? The old woman looked at her for a long moment, and Marin understood that she was, in fact, going to be told the thing, and that the telling would change something, and that Sorrel knew it too, and had decided that some prices are worth paying, if only to say a thing aloud to one other living soul before you die. "There's a boy," Sorrel said, "who tends the coals and the hounds and sleeps in the kennel, because no one will have him nearer. He came to us out of the mountain 9 years ago, half dead, with a wound in his leg that no still room in the world could set true, and he has never given a name, and the king keeps him, because a king who has stamped out a line likes to keep one broken servant near, the way a man keeps the last coin of a dead enemy, to remind himself he won." She leaned forward. "The frost cracks near that boy, girl, the hounds stand for him, the old stone warms where he sleeps. 9 years I've watched it, and 9 years it's been getting stronger, the way a thing gets stronger when it's waking, and I've said nothing, because to say it is to kill him." Marin set down her cup. Her hands were steady now. "You think he's Corvain?" "I think," said Sorrel, "that 500 years of a thing does not die because one drowned man stopped breathing. I think it goes to sleep. in the blood, and waits, and passes down through whatever's left, thinner and thinner, until it's only a rumor in the veins of a limping servant boy who doesn't know his own name, and then one hard winter, for reasons no one understands, it begins to wake. She stood and gathered the cups, and her old face closed like a shutter. I think you should count your stones, and mend your king's ledgers, and stay far, far away from the boy who tends the coals. That's what I think. Now sleep. But Marin, lying awake in the cold queen's bed with the frost feathering across the narrow window, did not think about the ledgers. She thought about the crack in the ice. She thought about the dark, tired, old young eyes that had come up to meet hers just once. And she thought, this was the dangerous thought, the one she should not have had, that she had spent her whole life being the small, overlooked thing that everyone stepped across without seeing, and that she had just been given, as a bond gift, a whole house full of people, trained to not see one particular boy. She knew, better than anyone in the keep, how to look at the thing no one else would look at. The Grey Keep in winter was a country of cold stone and colder people, and Marin learned its geography the way she had learned everything, by walking it and counting it, and keeping the map inside where no one could take it from her. She learned the great hall, where Halvard held his iron court, and the old hall behind it, disused, where the grey throne stood behind its arras. She went to look, once, alone, and lifted the corner of the hanging, and found it, a chair of grey stone worn smooth by 500 years of hands, plain, without a single jewel, and colder than the room around it, and she had let the arras fall, and stood a long time with her heart going hard for no reason she could name. She learned the keep by its cold, because the keep spoke in cold the way other houses speak in warmth, and she came to read it the way she read a ledger, each room a column, each column a different account of how much winter it was owed. The great hall was a shallow cold, a cold you could stand in, warmed at its edges by the 100 tallow lamps whose smell, mutton fat and smoke, and, under it, the old iron reek of the banner's rings, lived in the stone so deep that Marin tasted it at the back of her throat for weeks before she stopped noticing. The stairs were a deeper cold, a cold that came up through the soles and settled in the knees, and they were worn in their centers into shallow grey troughs by 500 years of feet, so that walking them she walked in the exact hollow worn by every servant and every king who had ever climbed to the high rooms before her, and she thought about that, on the stairs, in the dark, how the stone remembered feet, how it kept the shape of everyone who had pressed on it, whether it wanted to or not. She learned the smells of the place as a second map laid over the first, the tallow and iron of the hall, the green wet reek of the still room where sorrel's herbs hung drying in the rafters, the horse and leather warmth of the mews, the cold, clean nothing smell of the high corridors, where the wind came off the moor through the arrow slits and scoured the air of everything living. And, at the far end, past the midden, the low animal warmth of the kennel, straw and hound and wood smoke, and the particular smell of a place where something is kept alive against the cold, which was, she came to understand, the only truly warm smell in the whole grey house. And she noticed that too, the way she noticed the chipped stone under the priest's hem, that the warmest place in the Iron King's keep was the place where he kept the thing he thought was a broken servant. She learned the light, there was little of it, in a northern keep in deep winter, and what there was came thin and grey and sideways through the narrow windows, and moved across the floors slow as a tide, and Marin learned the hours by it the way she had learned to count by copper. This stone lit at the 9th hour, that arrow slit at noon, the grey throne behind its arras never lit at all, kept in a dark that was itself a kind of accounting, a debt of light 500 years unpaid. She learned that at the very end of the short day, for perhaps a quarter of an hour, the failing sun came level through the western slits and turned the cold grey stone, briefly, the color of a banked coal, not warm, but the memory of warm, the promise of it, and that this was the hour the boy came out to sit in the kennel yard and mend things. In the 1/4 hour the dead keep remembered fire, and she did not think, at first, that this was anything but chance. She learned the queen's rooms she had been given, high and cold and never warm, no matter how they built the fire. She learned the kitchens, warm and loud, where sorrel ruled. She learned the long stone yards, and the mews and, at the far end, past the midden and the wood stacks, the low kennel where the king's grey hounds were kept, and where, she had known this before she went, had walked out to it under the excuse of learning the grounds, which was true, and under the truer reason she did not name. The boy slept. She found him mending a latch. The kennel door had a broken latch. She'd heard the houndmaster curse it that morning. And now, in the blue last light of a short winter afternoon, the boy sat on an upturned pail with the broken latch in his hands, turning it, feeling along the bent iron with his thumb, the way her father had felt along a hide for the flaw, and she stood in the yard and watched him, and he did not look up, though she was certain, she noticed these things, that he knew she was there. "It's the pin," Marin said. "Not the latch, the pin's bent, so the latch can't seat." His hands went still. He looked up at her, then, and it was the same look from the ceremony, the dark eyes old and tired and wary, but closer now she could see the rest of him, the sharp bones and the ash on his cheek, and the way he held his weight off the bad leg even sitting down, always sparing it, an old habit worn into the body. "You know latches," he said. His voice was low and rough, a voice not much used. "I know things that are bent," Marin said. "It's a small trade. You can fix the pin with 2 stones and a minute, or you can wear out the latch fighting it for another year." For a moment he only looked at her. Then, without a word, he took up 2 flat stones from the yard and set the bent pin between them, and pressed, once, hard. And the iron gave with a small tick, and he set the pin back and seated the latch and it closed. Clean. First try. "There," Marin said. "You didn't come out here for the latch," he said. "No. They'll count it against you. Being seen with me." He said it flatly, a fact, the way you'd note that the ground was frozen. The king's new bond, in the kennel yard, talking to the thing no one talks to. Someone will carry it back. Someone always carries it back. "Then I'll give them something dull to carry," Marin said. "I'll say I came to learn which hounds bite. A bondwife ought to know which hounds bite." She crouched, then, so they were nearly level, mindful of the yard, mindful of the eyes she could not see, but knew were there, and she lowered her voice. "I want to make a bargain with you." Something flickered across his face, surprise, and under it, a wariness, so old it was almost grief, the wariness of a person who has learned that when the powerful offer bargains it is only a prettier word for the thing they are going to take anyway. "I have nothing to bargain with," he said. "You have a secret," Marin said. "And I have seen the edge of it. And the fact that I've said this to your face, and not to the houndmaster, should tell you what I mean to do with it, which is nothing." She held his eyes. "That's the first half of the bargain. I keep it. I don't know all of it, and I don't need to, and I'll keep the part I do know, until they burn it out of me, which I hope they'll be too dull to try." She drew a breath. "Here's the second half. I'm asking for one thing in return, and it's the only thing, and if you give it, I'll ask for nothing else." "Ask," he said, warily. "Don't lie to me," she said it plainly. "Everyone in this house lies to me, because I'm a debt they paid, and a tool they'll use, and I understand that, and I can live in a house of liars because I've done it before. But I need one door in it that doesn't lie. You can tell me nothing, you can say I won't answer that as often as you like, and I'll never press, but what you do say, let it be true. That's the whole bargain. My silence, for your one true door." The winter light was almost gone. Somewhere in the kennel, a hound shifted and sighed. The boy sat with the mended latch in his hands, and looked at this small counting woman crouched in the cold yard offering him the one thing no one in 500 years had thought to offer him. Not his secret unkept, not his silence bought, but a door that would not lie. And Marin watched something move behind his eyes that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name. And the closest she ever came was this. It was the look of a man who has been thirsty so long he has forgotten the name of water. Being handed a cup. "You're a fool," he said, but his voice had gone unsteady on it. "I've been called worse, and by better," Marin said. "Is it a bargain?" He was quiet a moment. Then, "What's your name? Your true one. Not bondwife, not the debt." "Marin," she said. "Marin Kale, and you may have it, but I warn you, it's the only thing I own free and clear, so spend it carefully." "Marin," he said, as though testing the weight of it, and then so low she nearly missed it. "It's a bargain." He did not tell her his name. She had known he wouldn't, and she did not press. But when she rose to go, mindful of the failing light and the carried tongues, he said, to her back, in that rough, low voice, "The old bitch. By the dais. The scarred one. She bites everyone," he said. "So you told them true. She bites everyone but me." It was. She understood. His side of the bargain begun. A true door. Opened one hand's breadth. She held it. That small truth, all the way back across the cold yards, and did not let go of it even in her sleep. What grew between them grew the way frost grows on a window, not all at once, not where you are watching, but overnight, in the cold, at the edges, until one morning the whole pane is feathered over, and you cannot say when it happened, only that it has. It grew in small things, because small things were the only things Marin had ever trusted, and small things were all a bondwife and a kennel boy were permitted. On the third evening she brought him bread, not out of pity, she was careful about that, careful never to bring him a thing that a proud person could not take, but because the still room baked too much, and it went to the hounds anyway, and she said so, and he took it and ate it without thanks, which was its own kind of thanks, the thanks of a person treating you as ordinary. On the fifth evening she brought the tea. This was a larger thing, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. She brought the twist of birch bark from the low valley, bitter as regret, the only thing that had ever let her sleep, and she brought her mother's chipped blue mug, the enamel-worn gray at the lip, the hairline crack that had never once leaked, and she made the tea over the low kennel fire in the boy's dented pot, and poured it into the one mug, because there was only the one, and they passed it back and forth in the dark, and neither of them said that passing a single cup back and forth is a thing that lovers do, and enemies do, and no one in between does, because there was no in between, in a house like that, for two people like them. "It's bitter," he said, the first time. "It's honest," Marin said. "Bitter things usually are." On the seventh evening he mended the crack in her mother's mug. She hadn't asked. She had only set it down between them, and he had turned it in his rough hands, feeling along the hairline flaw, the way he had felt along the bent latch, and the next evening when she came, he had run a thread of something into the crack. She never learned what. Some kennel craft of pitch and ash and patience. So fine you could not see it, so that the mug that had never leaked now never could, and he handed it back to her without a word, and she held it, and could not for a moment speak, because no one had mended a thing for her, freely, since her mother died. "You didn't have to," she said, when she could. "It was bent," he said. "You fix the things that are bent, you told me that yourself. And then, because the bargain held, because the door did not lie, I liked doing it. That's the true part. I don't get to mend things for people. Only for the king. It was..." He stopped, and looked into the fire, and did not finish, and she did not make him. On the eighth evening he cooked for her, though he would not have called it that. She came out to find him crouched over the low kennel fire with a flat stone laid in the coals, and on the stone, a handful of small speckled meal cakes no bigger than a coin, hissing, griddle cakes of barley meal and river salt, and a little of the honest bitter birch, pressed thin, and cooked hard on the hot stone. The food, he said, that the houndmen made for themselves in the deep of winter when the kitchens sent nothing down the yard. The food of the overlooked, cooked on a stone by men no one fed. He gave her one, blowing on it first, off the flat of his knife, and it was plain and hard, and faintly bitter, and tasted of wood smoke and salt, and the particular flavor of a thing made by hands that had learned to make much of little, and it was, Marin thought, chewing it slowly in the firelight, the best thing she had eaten since the Low Valley. Not because it was good, it was barely good, but because it was the first food in the whole gray house that had been made for her, and not merely set before her, and she understood the difference the way she understood everything, in the small overlooked detail, in the fact that he had blown on it first. "My mother made these," she said, before she could stop herself. It was the first time she had said "my mother" aloud in the keep. Not these, ours had a different meal, but like these, on a stone, in winter. She turned the little cake in her fingers. "She's 4 years dead. I've not made them since. I count things, instead of remembering them, mostly. It's easier. A number doesn't have a face." She stopped. The fire cracked. And then, because the door did not lie, and she found she wanted for once, to give a true thing rather than only be given one. "Thank you, for making me remember her face. I'd let it get away from me. On purpose, a little. It's back now." He did not answer that in words. He only made her another cake, and blew on it, and gave it to her off the flat of his knife, and they ate the small bitter griddle cakes of the overlooked, together in the kennel dark, while the hounds watched, and the snow came down beyond the door, and it was, she would think for the rest of her long life, one of the truest meals she ever ate, and she never once managed to make them taste, in all the warm years after, quite the way they tasted that cold 8th evening on a stone in the coals. Which is the way of such things, and she came to be glad of it, that some flavors keep only in the cold they were made in, and cannot be carried out into the warmth, and are the more precious for it. She learned the shape of him in those evenings the way she learned the keep, by counting and by patience. She learned that he had come out of the mountain 9 years ago with the wound in his leg, and no memory of before it. Or so he said, and she believed the no memory the way you believe a person who is telling you a true thing that is also a wall. True, and a wall, both. She learned that he could not read, and was ashamed of it, and that when she began, on the 9th evening, to teach him his letters by firelight, scratching them in the ash of the hearth with a stick, he learned them faster than any child, faster than seemed possible, as though he were not learning them so much as remembering them, and once, tracing the old gray letters that were carved into the kennel's ancient lintel, letters older than the Draeth, letters Sorrel said no one living could read. His hand had moved of its own accord, and his mouth had shaped a word, and he had gone white, and stopped, and would not go on, and she had not pressed, because the bargain held. Sorrel found her out. Of course Sorrel found her out. Sorrel had survived 60 years in a house of watchers by finding everything out. And one evening in the deep of the season, she was waiting in the Queen's cold rooms, when Marin came in late from the yard with the smell of wood smoke and hound in her hair. And the old woman did not pretend to be doing anything but waiting, and did not soften it. "I told you," Sorrel said. "The one thing I told you, stay far, far away from the boy who tends the coals. And you've been out to that kennel every second evening since the frost turned. And don't tell me you haven't, because the whole still room counts your comings and goings, whether you know it or not, girl. And if the still room counts them, the king's men count them, and if the king's men count them—" She stopped. Her walnut face worked. "You know how this ends. You're the one who counts. Count it. A bondwife and a servant. In the dark, in the cold. There's only one column that comes out to, and it's written in blood, and it's yours as much as his." "I know the column," Marin said quietly. She set down the mended blue mug. She carried it with her now, always, out to the kennel and back, And she looked at the old woman who had appeared out of the dark on her first night with a hot cup, and she understood that this was not cruelty, that this was the opposite of cruelty, that this was the one person in the whole gray house who had decided Marin was worth the danger of caring about, and was frightened, and was showing it the only way a hard old survivor knew how, which was as anger. I know exactly what it comes to. I've known for a good while now, since before I let myself say so. I'm not a fool, Sorrel. Whatever the court decided, I can see the ending. I can count it out to the last copper. Sorrel said, and her old voice cracked on it. Then for the love of every drowned thing in this house, stop while it's still small enough to stop, while it's still only bread and tea and a mended cup, before it's the other thing, the thing you can't take back, the thing they burn people for. And do what instead? Marin said. It came out gentle, which was worse than sharp. She saw it land. Go back to being the small, overlooked thing that everyone steps across without seeing? I've done that my whole life, Sorrel. I was good at it. It's kept me alive. It kept me alive up a mountain, and through a bonding, and into a dead queen's cold bed. And it is the loneliest, coldest, most survived way to be alive that there is, and I did it because there was never once, in all my life, a single thing worth stopping being invisible for. She picked the mug back up, and turned it in her hands, feeling the fine mended crack that did not leak and now never could. And then there was. That's all. There was one thing worth it. I didn't go looking. I went out to learn which hounds bite. But there it was, in the 1/4 hour the dead keep remembers fire, a man mending a bent latch because he liked to fix the bent things. And I'm sorry, Sorrel. I am. I know what it costs and I know whose blood pays it, but I've been given away and traded and counted as a debt my whole life, and this is the first thing I've ever, of my own will, chosen to walk toward, and I find I would rather die having chosen it than live another 40 years never having chosen anything at all. The old woman looked at her for a long, long moment, and then she did the thing Marin least expected, which was that the anger went out of her all at once, like a fire banked, and left behind only the tiredness, and something that in a less hard face would have been tenderness. Sorrel said, very low. There it is. I wondered if you were that kind. She turned to go, and at the door she stopped, and did not look back, and said, in a voice gone rough, I was that kind. Once, 60 years ago. His name doesn't matter now. He's been dead 50 of them. But I chose him, the way you mean, the whole body way, and they took him, the way they take them, and I've lived every day since being the small, overlooked thing that survives. She was quiet a beat. I don't know which of us was right, girl. I've had 60 years to work it out, and I don't know. But I know which of us was warm, for a while, and I know it wasn't me. And she went out, and shut the door, and did not speak of it again, and the next evening there was fresh bread left wrapped for the kennel, without a word said, twice the usual, enough for a man and the hounds both. Marin stood a long time with the mended mug in her hands after the door closed. She thought about Sorrel, 60 years surviving. She thought about the man dead 50 years whose name did not matter now. She thought about Worm, for a while, and about which was worse, the taking or the never, and she found she already knew her own answer, and had known it since the kennel yard, and that knowing it did not make her less afraid, only more sure, which are different things, and both can live in one person at once. On the 10th evening the snow came, the first true snow, and she found him standing in the kennel yard with his face turned up into it, letting it fall on him, and she stopped in the archway and watched, unseen, and saw the thing no one else in the keep had ever been positioned to see, that where the snow touched him it did not melt at once, the way snow melts on a living man, but sat for a breath, a perfect star of it on his dark hair, on the back of his rough hand, whole and unmelting, and then went, all at once, to water, as though it had been permitted. He was not warming it, he was letting it melt, holding the warmth of himself back with a care she recognized, because it was the same care she had spent her life on, the care of a person keeping the true size of themselves hidden so as not to be noticed. She understood, watching, that his whole life was that care, that he spent every waking hour making himself smaller than he was, that the limp, even, might be part of it, a thing to make them look away. She did not tell him she had seen. She only came out into the yard and stood beside him, and turned her own face up into the snow, and let it fall on her, and it melted on her cold skin the ordinary way, at once, and the two of them stood there in the falling white, the woman whose snow melted, and the man whose snow waited, and neither said a word, and it was the closest thing to peace she had known since the low valley. "It's the only weather I like," he said at last, low. "Snow? It falls the same on everything. On the king and the kennel both. It doesn't count who you are." "No," Marin said. "It doesn't count anyone." "You count everyone," he said. There was no accusation in it. It was almost fond. "I've watched you. You come into the yard and your eyes go round it. The hounds, the wood stack, the loose stone by the gate, me. And you're counting. Always counting. I can see it happen. You did it in the hall, at the bonding. You were counting the whole time they gave you away." 241 stones, Marin said. "In the floor of the hall. I missed one the first time. A small one, chipped at the corner." She looked at him, and the snow fell between them, and she said the truest thing, the thing under the thing. "I count because if I have the number of a thing, it can't take me by surprise." That's the whole of it. My whole life is trying to have the number of things before they have me. He was quiet. The snow came down, and then he said, so low she barely heard it over the hush of the falling white, "And do you have my number, Marin Kale?" And she looked at him, at the dark, tired old young eyes, at the snow star melting on his hair, at the bent latch hands, at all 500 years of the sleeping thing she could not yet name but had already, God help her, chosen. And she said, honestly, because the door did not lie, "No, you're the one thing I've never once been able to count." She let the snow fall between them a moment more. "And I find I don't want to. I think if I ever had your number, you'd stop being the reason I stopped being invisible. So no, I don't have it. I'm not going to try. You're the one thing I've decided to let take me by surprise." He looked at her for a long moment in the falling snow, and something moved in his ruined, careful face that had not moved in 9 years, and he did not answer, because some things are truer for being left unsaid, and they stood together in the white, until the short day failed, and the cold drove them in to the fire, and the one shared cup. She learned that the cold did not touch him the way it touched her. She learned this on the 11th night, when the fire had burned low and she was shaking with it, the deep valley cold that got into the bones, and he had said, roughly, "Give me your hands," and she had put her frozen hands out, and he had held them, not clasped, only cupped near, a hand's breadth of dark between his skin and hers, and warmth had come off him, like warmth off a stone that has sat all day in the sun, a steady, deep living heat with no fire behind it, and her hands had thawed and the ache had gone, and she had looked up and found him watching her with a kind of terror in his old dark eyes. "It's getting stronger," he said. It was not to her, it was barely aloud. "Every winter it gets stronger. Soon I won't be able to—" He stopped. "Won't be able to what?" she said, very gently, because the door did not lie, and because she thought he needed, just once, to say the wall aloud. "Hide it," he said, and that was all. But it was enough. She held her thawed hands close to her body, keeping the warmth of him in them, and she understood that whatever slept in the boy was waking, and that a waking thing, in a house that had spent 500 years pretending the thing was dead, was the most dangerous thing in the world. It was 2 evenings after that the king first spoke to her of the boy, and she understood, in the speaking, how little time was left. Halvard Draeth had taken to summoning her, Some nights, to the small warm council chamber, where he did his true work, not to bond with her. He had never once come to the queen's cold rooms, and she had come to understand that the bond had been a claim and not a want, a lock and not a marriage, but to use the tool he had been given, to set her the Western ledgers and watch her hold them whole in her head and give him back his numbers faster than his stewards could reckon them. She did not mind it. Numbers were the one place she was safe. Numbers could not be made to lie, and a man reading numbers off her face was not reading anything else. But that night, when the ledgers were done, the king did not dismiss her. He sat back in the firelight, with his pale river ice eyes on her, and he turned his cup in his hand. She noticed that. She noticed he had picked up the turning of the cup from somewhere, and she knew from where, and it turned her cold, and he said, mildly, "You go to the kennels." Not a question. Marin kept her face, the face she kept for bad counts. "You bade me learn the grounds, my king. A bondwife should know which hounds bite." "So you said." In the hall. A silence. The fire cracked. The boy who tends them. The lame one. Another silence. Longer. The silence of a man laying a stone very carefully to see if the ground beneath it will hold. "What do you make of him?" And here was the whole account. Marin understood, balanced on a single answer. Too much interest would damn them both. Too little, from a woman who noticed everything, would ring false to a man who had just watched her count his ledgers to the copper. She had perhaps one breath to find the number that came out true. "Nothing, my king," she said, and let a little boredom into it, a little of the fond contempt the court kept for the beast no one saw. "He mends the latches. He knows which of your hounds will take a hand off. That scarred old bitch would have had mine, but he called her down. That's the use of him, I suppose. A man who can call your worst hound down is worth his bread, even lame." She let the barest pause fall, and then she gave the king the thing she had learned. He wanted more than truth, which was the feeling of being the one who saw clearly. "Why? Have I been wasting my evenings on a thing beneath my notice? You'd know better than I, my king. You've kept him longer." It was well done. She watched it work. Watched the king decide that his clever tool found the boy as beneath her as everyone else did. Watched the stone settle, and, for now, hold. "Longer than you'd think," Halvard said, and something moved behind the pale eyes, an old satisfaction, cold as the throne behind the arras. "I keep him to remember a thing. Every house should keep one thing to remember by." He waved her out, but as she reached the door he said, not turning, "Which of my hounds will take a hand off, bondwife?" "The scarred old bitch by the dais," Marin said. "My king." "She died in the autumn," Halvard said. "Before you came. That's a new hound in her place. Wears her scars because they came from the same litter." And he let that sit in the doorway with her a moment. The small trap sprung, the proof that she had been told about the bitch, and by whom, and then he said, mildly, "Good night, Marin," using her name for the first time, which frightened her more than anything he had ever done, and she went out into the cold corridor and stood against the stone until her heart slowed and understood that the king was no longer not seeing the boy, and that the not seeing had been the only thing keeping either of them alive, and that it was already, quietly, gone. She thought, that night, walking back across the frozen yard. She thought about the frost that cracked, and the hounds that stood, and the letters his hand knew that his mind did not. She thought about the gray throne behind the arras, cold and plain and waiting. She thought about the fact that she was bonded to the Iron King, and warming her hands at the fire of the thing his fathers had drowned, and that if anyone ever understood what she understood, she would burn for it, and that she did not care, which was the part that should have frightened her and did not. She was not a woman who panicked. She had established this early, at 17, counting 19 men come to take one girl who would not be missed. But she lay awake that 11th night and understood that she had walked, patiently, one small true thing at a time, into the one thing more dangerous than panic, which is hope, and that there was no counting her way back out of it. The court gathered for the midwinter feast on the shortest night of the year, and it was there, in the crowded firelit hall under the gray banners, that the thing they had built in the dark was very nearly broken in the light. Halvard Draith kept midwinter, the way Iron Kings keep everything, as a demonstration. The hall was hung with the pelts of the year's hunting, and lit with 100 tallow lamps, and packed with the lords of the iron holdings, hard men in fur, come to eat the king's meat, and measure the king's strength, and carry home to their own halls the answer to the only question that mattered under an Iron King: is he still strong? And the king, to answer it, had done two things. He had brought out his bondwife, the counting girl from the conquered valley, and set her at his left hand where all could see the tamed west. And he had, for the first time in the memory of the still room, ordered the kennel boy to serve in the hall. Merrin understood the cruelty of it before the boy did. The king had not forgotten the broken servant he kept as a dead enemy's last coin. The king kept him deliberately near, on the night he most needed to feel large, to be seen among his hard lords with the drowned lion's last dreg pouring his wine. See how low they are brought. The grey kings, see what carries my cup. It was a small cruelty, casual, the kind of thing that costs a strong man nothing. It cost the boy everything. Merrin watched from the king's left hand as the boy limped the length of the hall with the wine, head down, the whole bright room arranging itself as always, so as not to see him, and she watched the strain come into his face. The strain she had learned to read in the kennel dark, because the hall was hot and loud and crowded and full of iron, and the thing beneath his skin did not like iron, and it did not like being paraded, and it was waking, and it was getting stronger every winter, and here it was in a room full of the men who had drowned it. A lord called Voss, the houndmaster, a heavy suspicious man who had never liked the boy, who had watched the hounds stand for him one time too many, caught the boy's sleeve as he passed. "Slow, aren't you, Cripple?" Voss said, loud, for the table's amusement. "Pour a man's cup before his beard grows." And he shoved the boy's bad leg with his boot, hard, and the boy staggered, and the wine jug tipped, and in the half-second before it struck the stones, the fire in every lamp in the hall guttered at once, as though a single great breath had passed over them, and did not go out, but leaned, all of them, all 100, leaning the same way like grass in a wind that no one felt, and the frost on the tall windows cracked, all at once, a sound like 100 small bones, and every hound in the hall came to its feet and turned, as one animal, to face the limping boy, and stood, and did not move, and the hall went utterly silent. And Merrin, who noticed the small ones, who had been watching for exactly this since the shortest night began, was already on her feet, already moving, already speaking into the silence with the flat calm of a woman counting 19 men. "The lamps are for the wind off the moor," she said clearly, into the hush, to the whole hard-eyed hall, and she made her voice bored, the boredom of a bondwife discharging a tedious duty. "My lord king, the old wives in my valley say, when the midwinter fire leans and the frost sings, the hard cold's coming down off the mountain by morning, and the beasts always know it first. See, even your hounds feel it. My people would say it's luck, that the year's turned, that the worst is behind." She let a beat fall, and then, the gamble, the whole gamble, spoken lightly. "Shall I have the boy bring more wine before it freezes in the jug?" And she laughed, a small, dry, ordinary laugh, the laugh of a woman making country talk at a feast, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever done, and it worked, because a room full of frightened men will seize any offered thing that lets them not be frightened, and one of the hard lords laughed too, gladly, and another said something about western witch weather, and the tension broke like ice underfoot and ran out through the cracks, and the lamps steadied, and the hounds, at some flick of the boy's white face, lay down, and Halvard Draith, at Merrin's side, laughed his rare and terrible laugh and said, "My bondwife earns her bread. Boy, more wine." But under the table, where no one could see. The king's hand had closed hard around Marin's wrist, and it did not let go, and when she dared to look at him, he was not laughing anymore, not with his eyes, and his eyes were the flat pale gray of river ice, and they were looking at the boy, and then at her, and then at the boy again, and Marin understood, with the cold, sick clarity of a bad count coming out right, that she had saved the boy tonight and in doing so had shown the Iron King exactly where to look. He had not seen the boy for 9 years, because he had trained the whole world not to, but he had just watched his clever counting bondwife, the one tool in his house he'd thought too small to matter, leap up and lie beautifully to save the one thing he kept near to remind himself he'd won. You do not fight for a coin. Not like that. Not with your whole body. The king knew how to count, too. They came for the boy 3 nights later, in the dead cold small hours, when even the still room was dark. Marin woke to the sound of the hounds, not barking, worse than barking, a low broken keening from the kennel yard that she had never heard before and knew. The way you know a scream in a dream is real, meant something was ending. She was up and moving before she was awake, out through the queen's cold rooms and down the servant's stair, with a wrap thrown over her shift and no shoes, and the cold of the stone came up through her bare feet like a bite, and she did not feel it. The kennel yard was full of men and torchlight. Voss was there, and 2 of the king's guard, and they had the boy down in the frozen mud, and they had been at him a while. She could see that. She could count it in the blood on the frost. And Voss was saying, over and over, in a voice thick with the particular joy of a small man given leave, "Say the name. Say your name, Cripple. The king wants your name." And the boy said nothing, only bled and said nothing, holding his one true door shut with the last of himself. The king was not there. That was the worst of it, the thing Marin understood at once. The king had not come to watch. The king had sent men to do a small thing to a small servant, find out what it is, and if it's nothing, break it, and if it's something, break it faster, and had gone back to bed, because to a strong man it was not worth a lost hour's sleep. The casualness was the cruelty. It always was. Marin did not scream. She was not a woman who screamed. She walked into the torchlight with her bare feet bleeding on the frost, and her voice pitched to carry the flat-board authority of the king's own bond, and she said, "The king wants him to count the western ledgers at dawn. Are you finished breaking the only man in this keep who's held the debt rolls? Because you'll answer to Halvard for it, Voss, not I." It was a lie built on nothing. It was the boldest lie of her life, and it bought 3 heartbeats of doubt in a stupid, cruel man. Did the king say ledgers? Did he? He might have. The counting boy, the counting wife, they were always at ledgers. 3 heartbeats in which Voss looked at her, uncertain, and in those 3 heartbeats the boy on the ground lifted his ruined face and looked at Marin, and she saw that he had decided something, and she saw it too late to stop it. "Enough," the boy said. He said it quietly, but the word went out across the frozen yard, the way a word goes out across still water, and it did not come back, and the torches leaned, all of them, the way the lamps had leaned in the hall, and this time they did not steady. The boy got up. He should not have been able to get up. He got up. He got up off the frozen mud with the blood black on his face and his bad leg under him, and as he rose, Marin saw the thing she had been circling for a season finally, fully, terribly arrive. 500 years of it. 500 years of dethroned power, waking at last all the way beneath his skin. And it was not gentle. It was not the warm hearth heat that had thawed her hands. It was the thing that heat had only ever been the far edge of. And the frozen mud of the yard cracked in a ring around his feet, and refroze in strange gray whirls, and the hounds threw back their heads and sang, and the old gray stone of the kennel wall, the ancient wall, older than the Draeth, older than the kingdom's memory, warmed, visibly, the frost sheeting off it in the torchlight, as though the house itself had woken and recognized the blood of its true master coming home. Voss ran. The guards ran. They ran the way men run from a drowned thing that has climbed out of the water, and Marin did not blame them, and did not move, and stood in the cracking, whirling cold with her bleeding feet, and watched the boy she had passed a single cup back and forth with in the dark, become, for one moment, the thing the whole keep had spent 500 years pretending was dead. And then it was too much. She saw it take him. The waking was too fast, too whole. 500 years pouring back into a body that had held only a rumor of it, and his face went from terrible to agonized, and the heat pouring off him spiked into something that was neither heat nor cold, but the raw seam between them. And he made a sound she never afterward described to anyone, and the light in him, because there was light in him now, under the skin, along the old gray letters that were suddenly visible on his arms like scars, remembering they were words. The light in him flared and guttered like the lamps in the hall, leaned and began, horribly, to go out. It was killing him. The waking was killing him. 500 years is too much to pour into one thin, limping body in one cold hour, and it was burning him up from the inside to hold it, and he was going down, into the world-frozen mud, the light in him failing. Marin caught him. She was small, and he was falling, and she caught him anyway, going down with him into the cracked cold mud, and she got her arms around him, around the terrible waking heat of him, which should have burned her and did not, which knew her hands, and she held on. She held on the way she had held on to the count of 19 men at 17. She held on the way you hold the one thing you have chosen in a life where everything else was chosen for you. No, she said, into the failing light of him, into the ruined dark of his hair. No, not now. Not after all this. You waited 500 years. You can wait for a warm room and a bitter cup. You don't get to wake up and die in the same hour. I won't have it. I counted you. Do you hear me? I counted you, and I do not lose the ones I've counted. And she got him up. She never afterward knew how. She got him up out of the mud and half-carried him, a bleeding barefoot woman and a burning dying king, across the frozen yard to the one warm place, the low kennel with the mended latch, and she got the latch open that he had fixed for her, and she got him inside among the hounds who parted for him and closed around him like a guard, and she banked the low fire high, and she wrapped him in the gray wool, and she held his hands the way he had held hers on the 11th night, cupped close, and she poured everything she had, her warmth, her stubbornness, her flat refusal to lose a thing she'd counted, into the small dark space between his skin and hers, until, sometime in the blackest hour before dawn, the failing light in him steadied, leaned, and held. He would live. She knew it the way she knew a count had finally come out true. He would live, and the whole keep would know by morning what he was, and the Iron King would come, and everything was ending, and she held his hands in the kennel dark and did not let go and was not, for the first time in her life, afraid of the ending, because the thing she had counted was still breathing. He told her the truth in the gray hour, when the fire had burned to coals, and the hounds slept, and the worst of it had passed, and there was nothing left in either of them but the truth. Aldrich, he said. His voice was a ruin. My name is Aldrich, Aldrich of the Corvain, the last of the gray line. He was quiet a moment, his ruined face turned to the coals. I've known for 3 years. I didn't come out of the mountain with no memory. That was the wall. I came out of the mountain 9 years ago, because the last Corvain who hid me, my grandmother's sister, older than Sorrel, the last one who knew, died in that mountain, and told me everything before she went, and sent me down here. He laughed, a small, terrible sound. Do you know why she sent me here? To the keep? To the very house of the men who drowned us? Because it's the last place they'd look, Marin said softly. Because the stone knows me, Aldrich said. She said the waking would come, whether I willed it or not, that it comes to all our line in the end, in the deep cold, and that when it came I would need the old stone near me, or it would tear me apart. She said the safest place in the world for a waking Corvain is the one place no one believes a Corvain could be. So I came, and I limped, and I tended the coals, and I let them not see me, and I waited to wake, knowing it might kill me, because— He stopped. The wall was still there, even now, one last stone of it. Marin waited. The door did not lie, but it did not have to open all at once. Because, she said, very gently, because a throne salted 500 years ago isn't a thing you want back, he said, when you've spent 9 years learning that the men who sit in it feed you scraps and shove your bad leg for a laugh and keep you like a dead man's coin. I didn't want to wake Marin. I wanted to sleep in the kennel and mend the latches and die a nameless servant and let the gray line stay drowned, because being drowned looked, from where I was lying, like the more peaceful thing. He turned his ruined face to her, and the old dark eyes were wet and terribly awake. And then, a counting woman came out to the kennel yard and told me the pin was bent, not the latch, and offered me a door that wouldn't lie, and passed me a cup in the dark, and taught me my letters, and lied beautifully to a hall full of iron lords to save my worthless life. His hand, in hers, turned and held. You woke me. Not the cold, not the 500 years. You. I stopped wanting to stay drowned, the night you thawed your hands at my fire, and looked at me like I was a man, and not a coin. That's the true part. That's the truest part, and I've been holding it shut because the moment I say it aloud I have to do something about it, and doing something about it will most likely get us both killed. Marin was quiet a long moment. She thought about the mended mug. She thought about the leaning lamps and the singing hounds and the bleeding frost. She thought about the gray throne behind the arras, cold and plain and waiting, and she found that she was not, after all, afraid of it. Then let it get us killed, she said. But not drowned. I'll not have you drowned again, Aldrich of the Corvain. Not after I counted you. Wake all the way up. I'm not letting go of your hands. He kissed her then, or she kissed him. Afterward neither of them could say, and it did not matter, the way it never matters, and they never troubled to settle it. It was nothing like the stories. There was no music and no light. There was only the low red glow of the banked coals, and the sleeping weight of the hounds, and the cold pressing at the kennel walls and held back by the strange living warmth of him, and her bleeding feet, and his ruined face, and the small chipped blue mug sitting where she'd set it on the hearthstone, with the last of the bitter tea gone cold in it. He lifted his hand, the hand she had been holding, and he laid it against the side of her face, and the warmth came off it, the deep living hearth heat with no fire behind it, and she felt it move down into her, into the cold and the fear and the years of being the small overlooked thing, and she turned her face into his palm, the way she had turned her frozen hands into it on the 11th night. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that the bargain had not already made true. She felt his breath change. She felt her own change to match it, the two of them breathing the same slow breath in the dark, and she thought, the last clear thought before thought stopped mattering, that this was the opposite of the bonding in the great hall, the opposite of the frozen basin, and the priest's cold fingers, and the king's hand closing over hers like a lock. That had been a bond made of iron, sealed by force, witnessed by strangers who wanted her to weep. This was a bond made of nothing anyone could see, of a mended latch and a bitter cup and a door that would not lie, sealed by choice, witnessed by no one but the old gray stone that had waited 500 years to feel its true blood warm again. When his mouth found hers, it was slow and careful and unbearably gentle, the kiss of a man who has spent 9 years not being allowed to touch anything he was not ordered to touch, learning, with wonder, that he was allowed this. She felt the old gray letters warm on his arms where they wrapped around her. She felt the cold give up at the kennel walls. She felt, somewhere under her breastbone, a thing settle and hold that had nothing to do with the iron bond in the hall, a warmth that answered his warmth, a small waking of her own, as though the choosing itself had lit something, and she understood, without being told, that this was the true bond, the old one, the Corvain bond, that could not be forced and could not be sold and could only ever be chosen, and that she had chosen it, freely, with her whole body, in a cold kennel among sleeping hounds, and would choose it again every day for the rest of a life she had, until this moment, never expected to want. She was not a woman who wept. She had proven that on the morning of the frozen basin, but she wept then, a little, in the warm dark, and he wiped it away with a thumb rough from mending things, and neither of them said a word, because some things are truer for being left unsaid, and the door that did not lie had never once required them to fill its silences. Outside, the first gray of the true dawn came up over the moor, and the frost on the kennel window did not spread. It stopped where it was, and held, and slowly, pane by pane, in the growing light, began to melt. The reckoning came, as reckonings do, and it was terrible, and it is not the part of the story Marin ever cared to tell. She would say only the shape of it, that the Iron King came for them with iron, as Iron Kings do, and that a waking Corvain in the house that knew his blood was not a coin any longer but a fire, and that the old grey stone remembered its master, and that the grey throne behind the arras, which the Draeth could neither sit in nor break, was found on the morning after the longest reckoning to be no longer cold. That Halvard Draeth, who almost never smiled, did not smile at the end. That the hounds chose, that the hard lords who had come to measure the king's strength went home having measured a different king's, and that some strengths, once woken, do not need to be demonstrated at a feast, because the whole kingdom can feel them turn, the way the beasts feel the hard cold coming down off the mountain, first. She would say only that when it was over, the grey line was not drowned any longer, and then she would change the subject, because she did not care for that part, the iron part, the part with the blood and the frost. She cared for the after. She had always cared more for the after than for the crisis. She was a woman who noticed the small ones, and the small ones live in the after. 3 months later, the frost had gone from the window of a warm, high room in the grey keep, and did not come back, no matter the season, because the man who slept there now warmed the old stone in his sleep, the way his fathers had for 500 years before the iron came. Marin woke in the grey before dawn, which was still her habit, and lay a while in the warmth, counting, she still counted, some things a life does not unteach, the small good things of her morning. The weight of his arm, the old grey letters on it, quiet now, warm and dormant, only words again, and not scars remembering they were words. The sound of the hounds in the yard below, the scarred old bitch chief among them, who bit everyone but the two of them now. The mended latch on the door, which he had brought up from the kennel and fixed to their own room with his own hands, laughing, because a man who has spent 9 years shut out likes a latch he can work himself. And on the sill, catching the first grey light, her mother's chipped blue mug, the enamel-worn grey at the lip, the hairline crack he had mended so fine you could not see it, so that it never leaked and now never could, with the bitter birch bark tea steeping in it, because he made it now, every morning, badly, too strong, and she drank it anyway, and told him it was honest, which it was. He stirred, and woke, and found her awake and counting, and said, in the low, rough voice that was less rough now, more used, "What number?" 7, she said. 7 good things, so far, you've woken and made it 8. Only 8. He propped himself on the bad arm. The leg was healed now, fully, the old wound closed at last in the waking, so that he no longer limped, though he still, sometimes, in a crowded room, held his weight as though he did, an old habit worn too deep to fully leave. I've served you tea, mended your mug, warmed your stone, and driven the frost from your window, and I rate a single point. The tea's too strong, Marin said. It's honest, he said, and she laughed and he kissed her, slow and warm. And outside the hounds sang, low and glad, the way they only sang now, and the old grey stone of the keep held its true blood close, and was warm all through for the first time in 500 years. They had made, between them, in 3 months, a life so small and so ordinary that it would have disappointed the songs, and it was the thing Marin was proudest of in all the world. He could read now. That was the thing she treasured most, more than the throne, more than the warm stone, that the letters she had scratched in the kennel ash by firelight had grown, over the turning of the year, into a man who sat by their fire in the evenings with an old grey book open on his knee, sounding out the words of his own drowned line, the histories the Draith had tried to burn, and Sorrel's people had kept hidden in the still-room rafters for 500 years against exactly this. He read slowly, and moved his lips, and was not ashamed of it now, and sometimes he would stop and read a line aloud to her, a line his ancestors had written, in the old grey letters that had once surfaced on his arms like scars remembering they were words, and his voice would go strange and full, and Marin would set down her tally stick and listen, and think that of all the things she had chosen in the kennel yard, she had not known she was choosing this, the sound of a man reading his way home. The grey throne stood in the old hall still, behind its arras. He had not moved it, and would not. He sat his court from it now, but he kept the arras, kept the old dark, because, he said, a throne that has waited 500 years has earned the right to be approached slowly, and not gawked at. But the dark behind the arras was not cold any longer. Marin had gone to look, once, alone, the way she had on her first week, and lifted the corner of the hanging, and found the plain grey stone chair worn smooth by 500 years of hands, and it was warm now, warm as a stone that has sat all day in the sun, warm the way his hand was warm, and she had laid her palm flat on the old seat, and felt the whole long patience of it, 500 years of waiting come out true at last, and she had let the arras fall, and gone away with her eyes wet, and told no one, because some accounts are private even from the man they concern. The loose stone by the kennel gate, she had counted it on her first day in the yard, the loose one, the overlooked one, he had set right one afternoon in the spring, packed and seated it true, because, he said, he could not bear a bent thing near him now that he was allowed to fix them freely, and she had watched him do it, and thought about all the bent and broken and overlooked things in the grey house, that were quietly, one by one, coming right. The latch, the mug, the loose stone, the drowned line, the small counting woman from the low valley who had never once, in all her life before this, been chosen, all of them, coming right. And every evening, still, no matter the weather, in the 1/4 hour when the failing western sun came level through the slits and turned the old grey stone the color of a banked coal, he went out to the kennel yard, and sat, and mended whatever the day had bent, and the hounds gathered round him, and Marin brought the bread and the bitter honest tea in the mended blue mug, and they passed the one cup back and forth in the failing light, exactly as they had in the dark of the worst winter, because some rituals you keep not out of need but out of love, to remember the cold you came through, and to taste, on purpose, on the tongue, how much warmer the same bitter tea is when you are no longer afraid. It was Sorrel who asked her the question, in the end. Sorrel, who had buried 3 kings and had not, after all, buried a 4th, but had lived instead to see a 5th throne warm, and who had appointed herself, with grim satisfaction, keeper of the new queen's still room, and speaker of the blunt truths a queen's court would otherwise never dare. They were in the still room, the two of them, on an evening in the turning of the year, and Marin was counting the winter stores, and Sorrel, without looking up from her herbs, said, in her walnut voice, the thing she had clearly been carrying a while. They'll say you had no choice, you know. When they tell it, the songs, they'll say the debt girl was sold to the iron, and the grey king rose and freed her, and they'll make you the thing that was freed, the prize, the coin passed from a false hand to a true one. She snorted. As though you were ever anyone's coin. I've a mind to correct them, but the young ones don't listen to old women. You correct them. You've the right, and the standing now, and the tongue for it. Tell them what it was. And Marin set down her tally stick and thought about it, the way she thought about everything, patiently, turning it in her hands like a bent latch, and then she gave the answer that was the truest thing she had ever said, the thing that was the whole of her if you wanted the whole of her, and Sorrel, hearing it, nodded once, hard, as though a long account had finally come out right. "They can say I was freed," Marin said. "It's not false. I was sold on a morning of hard frost, to a man who counted me as a debt paid, and I stood in a cold hall and let a priest mark my brow with water that had frozen in the basin, and none of that was chosen. I know what it is to be given. I was given away before I was ever asked whether I wished to go." She turned the tally stick in her fingers. "But that's not the story, and I'll not have it told as the story, because it puts the choosing in the wrong hands. No one freed me, Sorrel. I freed myself, one small true thing at a time, the way I've done everything. I walked out to a cold kennel yard of my own will and told a nameless boy the pin was bent, not the latch. I offered a door that wouldn't lie. I passed the cup. I caught him when he fell, when I could have run, when running was the sensible thing, and every soul in this keep would have called me a fool for staying. I chose the kennel over the queen's cold rooms. I chose the bitter cup over the iron bond. I chose a limping servant with no name over the king of the whole grey north, before I knew he was a king, when he was only a man who mended my mother's mug because it was bent, and he liked to fix the bent things." She looked up, and her plain face had in it the thing that had grown on people slowly, like a room you could not leave. "I was given away once. That I did not choose. But this life, this house, this man, this warm stone and these singing hounds and this too strong honest tea, this, I chose. I chose it with my whole self, in the cold, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, and I would choose it again tomorrow, and every tomorrow after, until the frost comes down off the mountain for the last time and takes me. That's the story. Not that I was freed, that I chose. Put that in the song, if the young ones will ever learn to listen." Sorrel was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Aye," and went back to her herbs, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and a blunt old woman knows better than anyone when a true thing has been said whole. That night the first snow of the new winter came down over the grey keep, soft and slow, the way the first snow comes when the year has turned kindly. Marin stood at the warm window of the high room and watched it fall, with her mother's mended mug warm in her hands and the honest bitter tea going cool, and behind her, the man who had been a nameless servant boy, and was now the grey king of the north, slept warm in the old stone that knew him, and the hounds slept in the yard below, and the whole ancient house breathed slow and warm around her, its long 500-year cold finally wholly gone. Downstairs, in the great hall, the ceremonial basin still stood on its silver stand where the priests kept it, filled with clean water against the next high rite. And in the morning, when the household woke and the first snow lay soft across the moor, and the frost had feathered every window in the keep except the ones the grey king warmed, the water in the basin had not frozen. Not that night. Not any night after. The cold had come, as the cold always comes, down off the mountain in the deep of the year. But it did not come into that house any longer. It stopped at the walls, the way it had stopped at the kennel window on the grey morning of the choosing, and it held there, at the edge of the warmth, and it waited, patient, the way cold things wait. And the water in the basin stayed liquid, and clear, and still, all through the longest night of the turning year, and reflected, when anyone cared to look, only the small, unfrozen light of the coming dawn.